This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds to lost west on both bases, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Marine ahead. Pull up. Marine ahead. Too low. Here.
On the afternoon of January 15, 2009, 150 passengers and 5 crew members boarded U.S. Airways Flight 1549 at New York's LaGuardia Airport. Among the passengers was an infant carried by its mother. The flight was piloted by Captain Chesley Sully Sullenberger, an experienced former military pilot. His co-pilot was Jeffrey Skiles, also highly experienced, but relatively new to flying the Airbus A320. This aircraft was powered by 2 CFM56 engines. The flight marked the final leg of a 4-day duty schedule for the crew. They were headed home after this journey. The aircraft had already completed 1 flight earlier that day. This was its second. According to the cockpit voice recorder, everything before takeoff appeared normal. The pilots engaged in casual conversation and light-hearted jokes, unaware of the disaster that lay ahead. There were minor issues like a load sheet discrepancy, which was quickly corrected, and a problem with the first officer's transmission button, which he noted in the technical log. The plane began taxiing toward runway 4 at LaGuardia. Everything appeared routine. First Officer Jeffrey Skiles was handling the flying, while Captain Sullenberger was managing the radio and acting as the monitoring pilot. Before diving into the main flight, there are 2 important facts. First, although Jeffrey Skiles had over 15,000 hours of flying experience and had flown various aircraft including the Boeing 737, he had only recently begun flying the Airbus A320. On the day of the crash, he had just 37 hours of A320 experience. This fact would later play a key role. Second, U.S. Airways operated 2 types of A320s, one fully equipped for overwater flights and one not. The overwater version had life vests for all passengers and special emergency slides that could be used as rafts. By chance, even though this wasn't an overwater flight, they were flying the overwater-equipped version of the A320. At 3:25 p.m., Cactus 1549 was cleared for takeoff from runway 4.
1549, runway 4, clear takeoff.
Captain Sully set full power, and First Officer Skiles pulled the aircraft into the air.
Cactus 1549, contact Air Squad Connect.
Good day.
At around 700 feet altitude, the captain reported their climb to 5,000 feet. The controller approved their climb to 15,000 feet, which Sully acknowledged.
Cactus 1549, 700, climbing 5,000.
Cactus 1549, Air Squad to contact line, maintain 15,000.
Maintain 15,000, Cactus 1549.
About 2 minutes after takeoff, while climbing through 2,815 feet and 8 kilometers from LaGuardia, Captain Sully suddenly shouted, "Birds!" Seconds later, the cockpit voice recorder picked up loud thumps and the sound of engines losing power. The aircraft had struck a flock of large birds, Canada geese. Each goose can weigh up to 35 kilograms. Both engines ingested at least 2 geese. One bird struck the outer engine and exited via the bypass duct. Another entered deep into the engine, damaging vital parts. Both engines failed completely and could not be restarted, but the pilots didn't yet realize this. As the bird strike occurred, the voice recorder captured First Officer Skiles saying, "Oh," and Captain Sully saying, "We're losing both engines." This quick recognition was critical. The sooner they understood the issue, the sooner they could respond. In his book, Sully described the moment. "In just seconds, we experienced a sudden, complete, and symmetrical loss of thrust. It was like nothing I had ever felt in a cockpit before." In his long career, he had never even lost a single engine, and now both had failed. When both engines fail in a large aircraft like a Boeing 737 or Airbus A320, it feels like hitting a wall. The plane's speed drops, and the pilots immediately know something is seriously wrong. Just 2 seconds later, Sully said, "I'm starting the APU. I have the controls." This quick action played a key role in saving the flight. In such emergencies, it's standard for the captain to take control while the first officer handles checklists. However, Sully quickly started the Auxiliary Power Unit APU, even though it wasn't part of the checklist at that moment. His deep experience told him time was running out and altitude was low. Just 10 seconds later, Sully, now flying the plane, told Skiles to begin the quick reference checklist and declared a mayday to air traffic control.
Cactus 15.9, turn left heading 270.
This is Cactus 1539. Hit birds to lost thrust on both engines, returning back towards LaGuardia.
Okay, you need to return to LaGuardia. Turn left heading up 220.
220.
At first, they considered returning to LaGuardia, but Sully realized they were too low, and turning would take them directly over Manhattan, one of the world's most densely populated areas. If they failed to reach the airport, the crash could kill hundreds on the ground. All of this occurred within just 12 seconds, a testament to the crew's speed and skill. Seconds later, Skiles began working on the checklist. With both engines dead at low altitude, Sully asked ATC if they could return to LaGuardia.
Yeah.
Cactus 1529. We can get it for you. Do you want to try to land 1013?
We're unable. We may end up in the Hudson.
Hi, Cactus 15.9. It's going to be left traffic to runway 31.
Unable.
Cactus 15.9. Runway 4 is available if you want to make left traffic to runway 4.
80, I'm not sure we can make any runway. What's over to our right? Anything in New Jersey, maybe Teterboro?
Okay, yeah, off your right side is Teterboro Airport. Do you want to try to go to Teterboro?
Yes.
As they dealt with the bird strike's consequences, the aircraft continued drifting away from the airport. Later investigations found that if they had immediately turned back after the strike, they might have landed safely. But pilots are trained to prioritize maintaining safe altitude before taking any action. Sully aimed to fly at the green dot speed and completed the dual engine failure checklist. He now considered his limited options. He knew they had reached about 3,000 feet but were descending. Turning would cost more altitude than flying straight. Pilots are taught in training that if your engines fail and you turn up, you will lose altitude trying to fly straight. Sully knew that if they turned back to LaGuardia, they would lose so much altitude that they would have no other option but to either land at LaGuardia Airport or land in a populated area, which could be a dangerous accident. If he turned and failed to reach the airport, he'd be forced to land in a densely populated area, a nightmare scenario. At this point, Sully and Jeff considered Teterboro Airport, but Sully quickly realized it was 16 kilometers away and they'd lose too much altitude trying to reach it. So Sully turned his attention to the Hudson River, an open, flat area. Early in the conversation with ATC, it became clear Sully was now considering ditching the plane in the river. Flying over a densely populated city like New York, any wrong move could have led to a major disaster. Sully quickly decided that landing in the river was the safest option. At this moment, the captain was fully focused on controlling the aircraft and planning the landing, while First Officer Jeff Skiles was working through the checklist. Jeff's main task was to somehow restart at least one engine so the aircraft could be brought into a more controlled state, possibly leaving an option to land on a runway. About 2 minutes after the engine failure, at 3:29, the captain used the public announcement system and said, "Brace for impact." This was a very important announcement because until now the cabin crew and passengers did not have a clear understanding of the situation. Sully's announcement made the cabin crew aware of the seriousness of the situation so they could prepare passengers for an emergency landing and instruct them to sit with their heads down. At this time, the aircraft was relatively calm, but Sully's words made it clear to everyone that this was an emergency and the aircraft was going to land soon. The cabin crew had already sensed something was wrong, but Sully's announcement made the gravity of the situation clear. As the aircraft descended, Sully noticed it was gradually losing speed. Various alarms started sounding in the cockpit. First, engine failure warnings, then traffic collision avoidance system, TCAS. Alerts, because they were flying over New York where several other aircraft and helicopters were present. Then, ground proximity warning system alerts began, warning that the aircraft was too close to the ground. Ground proximity warning system is especially critical when an aircraft is in danger of hitting terrain or buildings. Sully and Skiles had to manage these warnings while planning the landing. If they had the ditching checklist, meant for preparing for a water landing, it would have instructed them to turn off ground proximity warning system, since in this situation it wasn't helpful. However, they were still following the dual engine failure checklist, which is more suited to engine failures at higher altitudes. As a result, ground proximity warning system warnings kept going off, making it harder to focus on the landing. Around 3:29, about 2.5 minutes after the engines failed, the first officer realized he would not be able to restart them. Still, he continued trying per the checklist, but signaled to Sully that his efforts weren't working. By this point, both captain and first officer knew they would have to land without power. Jeff suggested pushing the thrust levers forward to see if the engines would respond. Even a small amount of thrust could have helped make the landing easier. However, Sully could clearly see there was no response from the engines. The plane was now very close to the water, and Sully was preparing to execute the landing. Their speed was already very low. As the aircraft approached the water, Sully asked Jeff if he had any suggestions. Jeff replied, "No, I have no suggestions," showing that Sully made sure nothing important was overlooked, even in the last moments. When the captain tried to land the aircraft, because of low speed and alpha floor protection, the plane could not climb as much as he wanted. He pulled the stick fully back, but the plane still hit the water hard. The force of the landing exceeded the Airbus A320's design limits, causing major damage to the tail section and breaking off the left engine. However, the aircraft slowed down and came to a stop in the water. Damage to the rear allowed water to start entering, causing the tail to sink. After successfully ditching, the pilots told each other, "That wasn't as bad as we thought," but they knew the next step was to get everyone out safely. Since the public address system wasn't working, Captain Sully got up himself and shouted to the flight attendants to start evacuating passengers immediately. The captain was relieved to see that the attendants were already doing so. The Airbus A320 was designed to float in the event of a water landing, allowing use of emergency exits. Fortunately, there was enough space on rafts and wings for all 150 passengers and 5 crew members. Images later showed passengers standing on the wings and at the front of the aircraft. Air traffic control quickly contacted the New York Port Authority, which dispatched boats within minutes. The boats successfully rescued passengers, though the weather was extremely cold and most passengers were soaked. If the boats hadn't arrived on time, there could have been fatalities, as the water temperature was only 5 degrees Celsius, 41 degrees Fahrenheit. Most passengers climbed onto the wings without injury, but one panicked passenger jumped into the water and tried to swim to shore, only to turn back due to the cold. Meanwhile, the captain of one rescue boat, who had seen the aircraft land, quickly arrived to help. Within minutes, all passengers were safely ashore. Once the aircraft was stable in the water, Sully and Jeff went through the cabin to make sure all passengers and crew were out, then exited last through the front emergency exit. For hours later, it was confirmed that everyone had survived. Captain Sully later described this moment as a huge and unimaginable relief. The air traffic controller who had tried to assist Flight 1549 was immediately removed from duty, standard procedure after any aircraft accident, and taken to a room without TV or internet for questioning. Later, he was shocked to learn the aircraft hadn't been destroyed and that everyone had survived. The aircraft floated in the Hudson River and eventually drifted to shore. It was recovered a few days later. The investigation revealed that the cause of the accident was both engines ingesting large Canadian geese. These heavy birds were flying at about 3,000 feet when they struck the engines. The world saw Captain Chesley Sullenberger as a hero for making the right decision under extreme conditions, saving all 155 lives. But as the investigation progressed, new questions emerged. The NTSB began to question why Sullenberger did not attempt to land at the nearest airport. Simulator tests showed some pilots managing to reach LaGuardia or Teterboro airports after the bird strike, raising doubts over whether Sullenberger had rushed into the river landing decision. But the real story didn't end there. Sully and many experts argued that real-life conditions are not like simulators. In real emergencies, there's a startle effect, where shock and stress delay decision-making by crucial seconds. This can't be replicated in a simulator. When the NTSB added a realistic 35-second delay for human reaction into the simulator tests, the results changed completely. No pilot was able to reach an airport safely, and all ended in crashes. This strengthened Sullenberger's position. The NTSB ultimately concluded that his decision to ditch in the Hudson was not only correct but the only option that could have saved everyone. Favorable weather, calm water, and the proximity of rescue teams also increased survival chances. Aviation safety experts later concluded that large birds like Canadian geese can pose serious risks to aircraft. Suggestions to prevent such collisions included placing nets or screens in front of engines, but these were not technically feasible due to efficiency loss and icing risks. Special campaigns were launched at New York and other airports to control bird populations, including culling and egg destruction. Thousands of Canadian geese and their eggs were eliminated to prevent breeding. Following the incident, many safety recommendations were made, including pilot training for emergencies involving dual engine failure at low altitude, improvements to emergency exits, checklists, and safety equipment. Captain Sullenberger and his team were hailed as heroes. Their quick thinking, skillful decision-making, and teamwork helped avert a major disaster. Today, this incident is remembered as the miracle on the Hudson. If this video amazed you, the next story will be beyond your imagination. Watch the next video about an aviation disaster whose truth is still hidden. Click here to learn the truth, and I'll see you there in just a second. Thank you.